There have already been a few videos about the wave of historical epics launched by the success of Ridley Scott's Gladiator. All of these films inevitably flopped at the box office. When the old master had seen enough of his chaos, he came back with Kingdom of Heaven, finally bringing an end to any efforts to revive the genre. But even though most of Gladiator's successors flopped in theaters, there were two lucky ones that managed to avoid failure. One of them, once all the cuts were taken out, probably made a small profit. Still, it wouldn't be fair to call it a failure, it just didn't live up to expectations. The second one did a bit better, but people were expecting much more from it too. That's probably why it was released alongside The Return of the King. Anyway, today, instead of focusing on the biggest failures that followed Gladiator, let's talk about the films that managed to survive, even if they didn't become huge hits. Instead of making one 20-minute video about two films, there will be two separate videos. One about The Last Samurai, and one about Troy. The Last Samurai has more in common with Gladiator than it might seem. Both films share the same screenwriter, John Logan. To be precise, Logan was the screenwriter on Gladiator, while for The Last Samurai, he came up with the idea and later helped develop the script. Logan and producer Vincent Ward were pitching the idea around Hollywood studios even before Gladiator hit theaters. Ward, who had recently failed with What Dreams May Come, didn't want to direct The Last Samurai himself, so he tried to find someone else to take on the project. Vincent is quite an interesting figure. Back in the early 1990s, he was planning to direct the third Alien movie with a bizarre script featuring monks fighting xenomorphs, a wooden satellite drifting through space, aliens attacking from structures that looked like outhouses, and other brilliant ideas that still leave people wide-eyed to this day. And this same Vincent was trying to push his idea for The Last Samurai on everyone. He even reached out Francis Ford Coppola, but the man was busy fixing Supernova and turned him down. Then Vincent pestered Peter Weir, who had just released The Truman Show, but after reviewing the idea, Weir conveniently fell ill and couldn't take on the project. Then Gladiator came out, and despite Vincent's involvement, everyone's perception of the script changed. People started showing interest in the project and found it quite promising. Eventually, Edward Zwick, who had previously directed Legends of the Fall, stepped in. Edward significantly revised the original script, meaning the previous directors who dropped out weren't rejecting the version of the film we actually got, but something entirely different. When it was announced that a major studio project was looking for a talented lead actor, Tom Cruise jumped on board. His paycheck for the film remains a point of debate. Some sources claim he was paid a flat $25 million plus a share of the profits, while others say Cruise agreed to work for next to nothing because the film was going to be rated R, and the studio didn't want the budget to spiral out of control. And if Cruise had asked for that much money, the studio would have had to take it out of their existing budget, which would have impacted the final result. What is certain is that Cruise had a first dollar gross deal back then, as he still does today, so he made good money from the film either way. First dollar gross means a star gets a percentage not just from the film's net profit, but from every ticket sold. In other words, the very first viewer who saw The Last Samurai was already paying a portion of their ticket price straight into Cruise's pocket. This generous deal almost ended Cruise's career in the late 2000s. Still, as long as the actor was bringing in loads of money, studios were willing to accept this kind of robbery. The biggest challenge for the filmmakers was finding shooting locations. Since they were making an authentic Japanese film, they wanted to shoot in Japan. However, after exploring the Japanese islands, they quickly realized that all the suitable locations were inhabited and had signs of civilization, which would turn post-production into a nightmare. They would have to remove towns, people, various towers, and other structures that would inevitably appear on camera. All of this would come at a hefty price. The filmmakers considered shooting in the mountains, but organizing the crew's work there proved impossible. That's when New Zealand came to the rescue. The filmmakers thought its landscape was similar to Japan's, but without signs of human presence around every corner. A few scenes were still filmed in Japan, just so no one would suspect anything. The only concern the creators had about filming in New Zealand was the rain. But shooting happened during a dry summer, something rare in that region. The Last Samurai is also notable for the fact that Tom Cruise managed to injure himself several times before filming even started. Cruise considered it one of the most important films of his career and trained as hard as he could. Back then, all the stories about Cruise being crazy weren't as widespread, but he was already deep into stunt training. At one point, while rehearsing some kind of headfirst jump, Tom hit the ground so hard it nearly delayed production. He simply couldn't walk properly. Apparently, though, he recovered from the injury in record time. The filming itself went smoothly. The film wasn't even shortened after test screenings, and the 2.5-hour version was released in theaters. This version is also considered the director's cut, as it includes everything Zwick wanted to add. The first real problem came after the film's release. Critics weren't impressed. All hopes for multiple Oscar nominations were quickly forgotten. Only Ken Watanabe and a couple of technical categories got recognition. Cruise was acknowledged only at the Golden Globes. The main complaint from critics was the portrayal of a white man as the savior of the so-called savages. The film faced harsh criticism, with people asking how much longer they'd have to keep watching stories like that. It also drew fire for its historical inaccuracies. Upon closer inspection, it turned out that the only things it had in common with reality were the country of Japan and the fact that samurai once existed. The rest was pure fantasy. But the funniest part was that the film made the wrong guys the villains. From a modern perspective, it was actually the samurai who were in the wrong. Not because they fought for honor, as the film suggests, but because they were rebelling over the loss of their privileges. For example, a respected samurai could no longer just walk the streets and kill peasants because he felt like it. It's well known that the image of the samurai has been heavily romanticized in cinema, just like cowboys, who in reality were just cattle herders doing tough, low-paid work. Cowboys spent weeks sleeping under the open sky, surrounded by mosquitoes. But thanks to Hollywood, cowboy came to mean anything but actual cattle herders. That kind of distortion really irritated Japanese critics, who pointed out that most samurai, especially the poorer ones, actually supported modernization, and that only the wealthy, privileged ones rebelled. Given all this, it's hard to understand why The Last Samurai became so popular in Japan that, for a while after its release, people there unofficially celebrated Tom Cruise Day. After all, the movie turned out to be such an over-the-top fantasy that even Red Heat might seem like a documentary by comparison. The Last Samurai hit theaters in December 2003 and got off to a very weak start. Just a couple of weeks later, it was overshadowed by The Return of the King, which broke all kinds of box office records. In the US, the film grossed only $111 million against a $140 million budget, but the international release saved it. Japan alone brought in $132 million, which is pretty remarkable. In total, Tom Cruise's film grossed $454 million worldwide, almost as much as Gladiator. But Gladiator was made on a smaller $100 million budget and also did extremely well on home media. There's no info on The Last Samurai's performance in that market, but judging by its great viewer ratings and the number of IMDb reviews, it's probably done well there too. Despite all its fantasy elements, the film turned out to be great. By the way, actor Ken Watanabe is still asked about the film's over-the-top fantasy. Recently, he said again that he doesn't regret taking the role and that he always knew Americans would turn it into a typical Hollywood production. Still, it was a chance to showcase Japan in a major film for the world, so he agreed and said he would do it again. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the video about Troy.